Hi. So, I'm absolutely delighted to be here. I'd like to thank the programming committee for the invitation. And also, I'm thrilled that so many of you have chosen to spend the next few minutes with me. Thank you so much for coming. One thing that, this is what our topic today, wearables as a new frontier for media. Something Håkan did not mention, and thank you for the lovely introduction, is I actually live here this year. This is my, yes, I've been in Norway in the winter shot. So this is very rare for me. I actually got up and walked to a speaking engagement, which is something that doesn't happen very often. So a little bit about the work I do with the Center for the Digital Future. This is sort of all of the many hats that I wear. Very briefly, about our work, we have had the same 1,500 families that we've been interviewing on an annual basis for 15 years. We have an unparalleled data set, and we've been watching the transformation that the internet and all things digital has been making on our lives. It's a very exciting time. We are also the hub of the World Internet Project, which is pursuing similar work in 35 countries all over the world. Sadly, not Norway yet, but we're very ambitious. So the question, I think, on our minds, this is my Twitter handle. So if you like what I have to say today, you can get much more of it over the course of time. But let's talk about the really pressing question, which is, why do media people care about wearables? What do wearable computers have to do with media? And it's a tough question. It's one I'm going to try to answer. I think that if nothing else, it's going to be a very big market. Credit Suisse thinks it will be a 50 billion market by 2018. The people over at IHS are more conservative. They think it's going to be about 33 billion by 2019. We can zoom in a tiny bit, and that there'll be about 225 million devices shipped by then. So if nothing else, again, a very big transformative market. Now this is an eye chart that my friends at Wearable World have created. It's a taxonomy of all of the different kinds of wearables. But if we zoom in a little bit, you'll see around that inner ring that we're talking about watches, glasses, clothing, smart bands, jewelry, and headgear, which we usually call heads-up display or glasses. If you go to the outer ring, you'll see this is across health, fitness, entertainment, and lifestyle. Now, what's missing here, and what's missing frequently from these discussions, is business to business, or business applications for wearables, which is actually where a lot of the really exciting stuff starts to happen and then trickles out to the mass. So I'll talk about that off and on a little bit. This is a chart from Sarah Rotman-Epps, formerly of Forrester, now of Facebook, and these are all of the different places on the body that wearable computers can go, as well as with some percentages about how people feel about them. So, lots of people are okay with something on the wrist. Only a few people are interested, 4%, interested in having a contact lens that's digital. I'm not that comfortable with a contact lens regardless of whether it's digital or not, but it shows how things are working. So the big point is, though we're all very excited about the Apple Watch, which launched a couple of weeks ago, wearables and the wearability and the phenomenon of what these things mean, their impact for our lives as citizens and also for media, go way beyond the Apple Watch. They also go beyond the HoloLens. So they go beyond, which is Microsoft's new heads-up display. They go beyond any single device, and that's what I'm trying to convey over the course of this time today. Eventually, the vision for wearables is that we'll have a kind of cloud of sensors all over our bodies, and that not only will we have things that we can stick onto our bodies, but when you buy a pair of pants in the future, and in the not-too-distant future, then you'll actually have computer-enabled blue jeans. I'm not sure why. Perhaps they can tell you when it's time to wash them, but we have this overarching amount of computivity that's going to be washing over our bodies. So I want to talk about some of the weirder wearables. This is Nail-O, which is a mouse that you have on your thumb, and you can control a cursor just by rubbing your finger over your thumb, which if you're cooking in the kitchen or doing something where you can't touch a computer could be quite handy. This is actually remarkable. This is a cybernetic hand that connects to the nervous system of the wearer. So an amputee here can actually feel and has a sense of touch with the prosthetic hand for the first time. This is the mobile music touch glove, which you wear on your hands, and it starts to build up the muscles for playing piano or playing guitar before you've actually taken a lesson. And for people who do this, I know it sounds like cheating, but it just speeds the process along. And my fantasy is that someone will connect this with Guitar Hero, and suddenly you'll really be rocking out. This is genuinely bizarre and fascinating. Feel Space has a belt that goes around your body, and it vibrates so that you always know where magnetic north is. And what's so interesting about this is not that it's ridiculous, which it is, but that the people who've worn it, when they take the belt off, they say they feel like they've lost one of their senses, like they suddenly can't smell anymore. We become habituated to new sources of information very, very quickly. For example, how many of you have checked your phones in the last 3 seconds? It's not just wearables. We're also talking about implantables. This group of people in Sweden all got together and they had RFID chips inserted in a piercing tattoo parlor into the fleshy bit of their hand here or here. And suddenly that means that they can use their hands to open their computers, their phones, their cars, their homes, that you become the key. We've been working on biometrics, retina scans and fingerprint scans, but we may not need that if you can just pop a little chip in there. If someone cuts off your hand, well, you probably have bigger problems. This is Proteus Digital Health. They have smart pills that you swallow. The pill then communicates to a patch that you've taped to your side. The patch then communicates to a smartphone or a tablet, and it can tell you whether you've been compliant with your drugs. It's also increasingly a form of scanning your intestines without having to stick something down your throat or up the other end. And so not only is it more comfortable, but it's also a different and more compelling data set. This is truly bizarre. This is a prototype from Cute Circuit, which is the hug shirt. So if I'm wearing the hug shirt and, say, my very cuddly 9-year-old son is holding a hug shirt, I can do this, and wherever he is, he will feel me hugging him. So remote-controlled touch. If a hug doesn't do it for you, you might like Fundawear, which from the Durex people, their lab down in Australia. This is remote-controlled foreplay, where she has an app on her phone that controls his underwear. He has an app on his phone that controls her underwear, and it's a way of being close when you're far apart. When I described this to my wife as a foreplay app, she said, "Honey, that's a masturbation app." I think she might be right. By the way, the woman on the left looks like she's having way more fun. There's so many wearables. This is my daughter. It's so hard to categorize them. So we're going to talk about how to think about these things. But I am avoiding the question that I started with. I'm avoiding the question of what do wearable computers have to do with media. So let me dig in with 3 provisional answers right now. Number 1. New screens on the body, a fresh canvas for your content, and also new content opportunities. You've seen youngsters in particular, they don't need the big screen in the living room. They're comfortable watching movies on a little tiny phone. And as one of my friends says, it's like, okay, 35 millimeter, 70 millimeter IMAX. That's how they experience these things. So some wearables are yet another screen. We also have new metrics. Suddenly, you're going to, particularly if you're advertising supported media, you will soon be able to track people not just on whether they're watching or not. You could conceivably track their galvanic response. Do their heart rates go up when they're seeing a piece of content or a particular advertisement? Does their engagement go down? Also, do they leave the living room and go to the bathroom during the show or the thing because you've got a tag on them? Now, this is very spooky and creepy, but it's also very possible. It's also just the ability to track what people are responding to and the kind of interactions that I'll be describing. And now we have also new platforms for play, which is old behaviors changed and new behaviors enabled. So I want to dig in here because I think this is where wearables really come alive. Old behaviors changed. This is one of my favorite pictures that I've ever seen. You're all laughing because the story just tells itself, doesn't it? Here they are, a young couple. They have their hands on a member of the desired sex for the first time in their lives. They're sharing an intimate moment with each other and also with all of their friends because they're texting over each other's shoulders. The slow dance is a very old behavior, but the slow dance with texting is a new behavior. Technology and behavior evolve in their own complicated dance. And that's one of the things that I'm talking about today. Not only old behaviors, but let's talk about new behaviors enabled. Now, sometimes these behaviors are temporary, and sometimes they're lasting. For those of you who are, over 40 and have been on Facebook for a while, you may remember throwing a sheep. Raise your hand if you remember throwing a sheep. Oh, gosh, it must be a very young crowd. So, early on in Facebook, there wasn't that much to do. So you could poke someone, and a lot of poking, and then there was super poking, and there was also throwing sheep. So Bob threw a sheep at Tim, Julie threw a sheep at Bob, and all it said was people would throw sheep at each other, and it was very bizarre. And it eventually was abandoned, but it was because there wasn't that much for people to do on Facebook when it first started. But later, and very quickly, what happened was people started sharing photos, and this is important. Facebook did something that all media companies can learn from. They watched their data very carefully. They saw that their users were changing their photographs, their profile pictures, the only picture you were allowed in the early days of Facebook. Lots. They were changing it multiple times a week, sometimes multiple times a day. Photos were a badge of identity. So then, in the fall of 2005, Facebook only had 5 million users. They introduced photos. 4 years later, they had 350 million users. They were hosting 30 billion photos. Today they have 1 billion users, and they have the largest repository of photographs ever. And Matt Kohler, who's now a venture capitalist but worked at Facebook in the early days, he said trenchantly, the mechanism of distribution was the relationships between people. We can also talk about Tinder. Tinder, which is changing courting behavior, it's changing online courting behavior from Match.com or eHarmony or any dating site. And instead, just several months ago, the numbers are much bigger by now, I'm presuming, 850 million swipes per day, 50 million matches per day. That's changing a lot of behavior. It's making it mobile, it's making it social, it's making it immediate. And it also applies to news. This is from the Pew Research Center in the United States, just came out a few weeks ago. This is based on some January data. If you look here, look at the big bar up top, that's the total audience. The little bar is the desktop audience, and the larger gray bar is the mobile audience. In the United States, mobile news now indelibly, permanently trumps laptop and desktop news. People are moving to the most convenient, smallest possible container and getting their news in bite-sized chunks. These are micro behaviors. Micro behaviors. You used to have to buy an entire album to get the one song that we wanted. It was basically extortion. Now we can only buy the song, and we can get the piece of news that we want. A big challenge for media people. What does that have to do with wearables? Well, wearables accelerate this statement that Larry Page, the CEO of Google, made. Technology works to shorten the distance between intent and action. Wearables, I think, give that an espresso and a candy bar. So this is where that shortening hits wearables. This is a picture that anyone who has a child or who has ever played with a child will immediately recognize. Right? Dad is spinning the boy. The boy is happier than he's ever been. Now, here's the question. How do you take the picture? Right? You can't take a picture like that. This is, by the way, Sebastian Thrun, who was one of the early engineers for Google Glass. And he could take the picture because he said, okay, Glass, take a picture. Right? Wearables create this extraordinary opportunity for people to do things that they couldn't do before, to shorten that distance. So another way of thinking about it, and I think another way that it's very helpful to see how it impacts with media, is to think about wearables as the next step of our digital journey, which is our journey with digital. So for those of you who've been around online for a while, this is our first stop when we became digital for the first time. You went to the computer in the disused back room of your parents' house. You went away from your life into the internet. And going into the internet was going to another place. You were going to Wonderland. You were going to Narnia. We talked back then about cyberspace. Then came mobile, and sorry, not mobile. Then came broadband, and more importantly, then came home networking. And suddenly, the laptop was cast loose from the back room. We could bring it into the living room, and we could look at it together. Now, the most important thing about this picture is that no two people in their living room have ever looked like that. No living room looks like that. Your living room probably looks more like this, where you see the elephant's graveyard of appliances, the big bag of chips, the broken down couch, and they are slumped together, happily looking into their laptop. Then came mobile. The internet suddenly was cast loose from the house and was wandering around the world, and our digital world and our meat space world, our physical world, they suddenly came together. And after a while, everyone had a cell phone. Isn't this beautiful? Everyone in the planet has a mobile phone now, it seems. Then came cuddle-up technology, the tablet. And if you have a young child, you know that the hardest challenge of using a tablet is getting it away from the child so that you can actually look at something. Tablets also created something I was never expecting, which is a new use for the family pet. You can rest the tablet on Fido. And so digital has gone from the back room into the house and out into the world. Where does digital go next? And the answer is everywhere. This is some of the work that I'm leading right now at the Center for the Digital Future. We are looking at 5 big new trends and how they are extending digital throughout the rest of our lives. So cloud computing, hardware goes away. Suddenly you don't have to have big appliances anymore because most of that functionality is available if you have a connection. 3D printing, manufacturing changes rapidly. It goes from mass and industrial to niche and personal. Robotics takes action and moves it into the world, whether you're talking about drones or self-driving cars. The vision of having lots of little things darting around through the air and on the ground is creepy, but powerful, and Amazon in the US is actually trialing drone delivery. We have the Internet of Things, which turns everything, including your home, into a digital environment where not only are you talking to your machines, but they're talking to each other. The people at Cisco call this the Internet of Everything. And then our special topic today, wearable computers. So remember I went through all of those crazy devices, which was only a handful, and it's very hard to think about the right ways to categorize them. How do you think about these things? How do you use them? Well, what I'd like to argue is that the key distinction is not the device or where it is on the body, but its orientation to time. Right? Wearables split into 2 general buckets. They split into wearables that are in the now. They are interruptive. Information from the world is coming and onto your body. It's telling you to stop doing what you were already doing, perhaps what you were happily doing, and instead pay attention to something else. It's interruptive. Then we have wearables that are oriented towards the future, towards then, taking information, gathering information, and sending it out to the world, or sending it out to the world for later use. So let's zoom in on information creation wearables. This is what we call the quantified self, which is a very bloodless term. It's not a lot of fun. It also sounds like a math problem, and no one likes to do math. So I'm trying to come up with something better than the quantified self, but at least it gets us to what my friend Rob Norman calls the quantified selfie, which is when you share the details of your run, walk, or cycle from a wearable device onto a social network. Now, what's interesting about this sort of wearables, which mostly is fitness bands, is that we've always created information as we've moved through the world. But wearables allow us to do things with that information for the first time. My friend Rennie Gleason calls this the data contrail that you leave in your wake as you move through the world. This is an exciting new frontier. And it's not just fitness bands, by the way. Disney spent $1 billion on the Magic Band as a gigantic experiment at Walt Disney World in order to let people pay for things, register for things, and also to track who was going where in the park in Orlando, Florida. So suddenly, if everyone was in Tomorrowland, they could deploy more people to go over there, or set up a parade in Adventureland so they had to give people something else to do, right? It's important to watch how businesses interact with the wearable devices that we're putting on our bodies. So again, these are the fitness bands, Nike Fuel, which is gone, Fitbit, Jawbone. I have the Jawbone up on my wrist right now. But Fitbit really dominates the market. They have more than 50% of the market in the US. And when they're in the funny papers and the medieval knight is saying, hey, I've reached my Fitbit step goal, you know you're on to something. So It's also interesting to watch the relationships that people get into with their wearables. This is a young woman named Emma Lord who writes for Bustle, which is a fascinating website. And she writes that there are 19 very real and emotional struggles of having a Fitbit, or does your Fitbit have you? She's become obsessed with her device, and she doesn't hit her goal, and right before bed she'll be standing there walking in place in order to get to that 10,000 steps. You know, it's fascinating how behavior changes in the face of technology. And it's also, again, this is back to the business idea. This is from April in the New York Times. And Discovery, the health insurance company, is giving people discounts if they're more active, right? The guy goes to his gym, he swipes in, he gets a discount on his life insurance, excuse me, not his health insurance. What's interesting, though, and this is a little bit scary, is that the life insurance company is also giving people a free Fitbit monitor that is automatically set to load his activity level to the insurer. If you're active, you get a discount, up to 15% of your premium, you get Amazon gift cards, you get half-price stays at hotels, you get other perks, which on the one hand sounds great, but is the reverse also true? If you don't, or if you're not active, does your premium go up? You know, how much is that data going to be used for you as a customer, and how much against you? And if you find this completely horrifying, then I will urge you to read my novel, Red Cross, where I have the nightmare scenario of how this works. For a long time, only men would wear these fitness bands because they're ugly, and no self-respecting woman would put one on her body. But now Fitbit is partnering with Tory Burch, and the Swarovski people and the Misfit Shine people are turning these things not only into fitness devices, but also fashion accessories. And it's not just fitness bands that you wear on your wrist. This is the Ohm Signal shirt, which covers your heart rate, your stress level, how many calories you've burned. So again, never confuse form factor with functionality. You can turn that functionality into other different shapes and sizes very easily. And this, again, back on the B2B for the moment, Samsung's taken out a patent on a hazard shirt so that if a firefighter, for example, is in a dangerous environment where suddenly it's getting a lot hotter or there's a lack of oxygen, the shirt will feel that before he does, and also the shirt will communicate that back to the team outside so they know that he needs help. Now we're back to timepieces. This is the Dick Tracy cartoon series and the original conception of the smart watch, a TV, two-way wrist TV here. And so this is when I think we ought to talk about the Apple Watch. The Apple Watch is only one of many smart watches that are happening right now, but it's the most famous, it's probably the most sophisticated, and it's certainly the most expensive. This is the top of the line. It costs $17,000. For that amount of money, I could pay someone to walk behind me all year and tell me what time it is. And probably make me coffee, too. But what's interesting about the Apple Watch and the way that the Apple Watch is conceptualizing itself is it's conceptualizing itself as a kind of filter. You can get texts on it. You could reply to them through your voice. You have an activity monitor. It tells you whether or not you've reached your goal. But again, there's also weird things, right? This is a thing where you can send your heartbeat to someone else who has the Apple Watch. It's a way of making that contact with someone. Not enough people have the Apple Watch to make this really viable right now, and so Reddit has this whole collection. Basically, it's like a lonely heartbeats people, where people can actually sign up to trade heartbeats with people because you don't actually know someone who has the watch. So this is an example of throwing sheep, right? This is, and it's important to throw sheep at people early on in a technology. And I don't think that when we're at the Apple Watch 3 that people are going to be sharing their heartbeats anymore, but it's an interesting opportunity to give people a way to play with this technology. Most intriguingly, Apple thinks of the Apple Watch as a filter for all of this information overload, too many things flying at us all the time, and they think that the Apple Watch will allow you to concentrate on the things that you really care about. At first, I thought this was baloney. I just didn't believe it at all. But I actually read this interesting piece by Matt Gemmell, who's a very smart man, and here's what he wrote. The watch is the first device that's encouraged me to spend as little time as possible with it, or with any of the other electronic sinkholes around my office, my home, and in my pockets. Now, any device which is encouraging people to spend less time with it is potentially dangerous for media people, right? Are you encouraging people to spend less time with media in general? Are you encouraging people to spend less time with their phones? Are you taking down the tonnage of information that people are getting every day? There's definite benefits to that. It sounds like a more peaceful world, but there are also threats as advertisers and media people are clamoring for attention. But this is a new form of media, a new approach to media, which is called glanceable or glanceability. It's not an Apple term, actually. Google invented it about a year ago. Things that are glanceable will allow you to stay in the moment, stay in the flow of the things that you care about. And advertisers, oh, I think I zoomed in a little too hard here. Advertisers are getting into this game. So Unilever has created a exercise app to go with their degree product. And it's important for two reasons. First, it's showing that a lot of people are jumping on the bandwagon of the Apple Watch, but also if Unilever, which is a magnificently large advertiser, is spending money on this, then they may not be spending money with you. And so that's a different kind of threat. By the way, this is one of the funniest things I've read about the Apple Watch. It's called Tattoo Gate, because if you have a tattoo on your wrist, it interferes with the sensors, so you can't actually get the Apple Watch to do what it needs to do. Surely someone who works at Apple has a tattoo on their wrist. How did they miss this one, is what I'd like to know. So why am I not suggesting that people are going to be watching movies on the Apple Watch? Why isn't it largely a media consumption device? And I think that eventually it will be. But I think at the moment it's not, for two reasons, and these are two problems that happen with all wearables, including the Apple Watch. The first is that it's tethered to a phone. Almost all wearables, you have to have a phone in order to use them. You can't just use them out in the world. You get information from the phone. The phone is the thing that conveys the internet. So problem number one. Problem number two, the batteries are terrible. And by the way, this is the other big problem, the big challenge with wearables. If the vision is true, and eventually we'll have 17 wearables at night, does that mean we have to plug in 17 things before we go to bed every night? You know, I already have to plug in a tablet, a computer, and a phone, and this thing, I don't want to be plugging in 17 things. So these are two big challenges, and I think that what I'm saying here is that although people will eventually watch Netflix on their wrists, I think that there are logistical challenges in the way of that. But again, it's early days, right? These things are going to develop quickly. Look at here. In 1983, that toaster that Michael Douglas is holding in Wall Street is the Dynatac, the first mobile phone. It was 28 ounces. It was 10 inches long. You could talk on it for half an hour, and it cost $4,000. 20 years later, the iPhone 5S weighed 4 ounces, was less than 5 inches long. It had, well, I don't know what imbecile says that any Apple device has 10 hours of talk time, but it pretends to have 10 hours of talk time, and it cost $100 when subsidized. So if you think about the devices, the wearable devices, and project them forward 20 years, then a lot of the problems that we're seeing with them are going to go away. Let's move on to the other kind of wearable, which is wearables that take information from the world and push it onto your body. Information display, things that interrupt you. And mostly we're talking here about spectacles, about glasses. And it's worth making a distinction between augmented reality and virtual reality. Augmented reality, which is a layer of information on top of the world we live in. Virtual reality, which is a different world into which we are traveling. So Google Glass is, I think, the most famous example of augmented reality, information and interaction. And Google Glass got a bad rap pretty quickly. People were calling people who wore them all the time glass holes, and it was weird to have these lenses, these prisms on people's heads all the time. But again, the use case didn't make a lot of sense for people in their day-to-day lives. And it only lasted for a couple of hours. You could take interesting pictures like the one I showed you. But this is a doctor in Massachusetts, an emergency room doctor. And he uses Google Glass in a very remarkable way. It allows him to pay more attention to his patients. It allows him to keep eye contact, to keep caring for them, while having information about the drugs they're on, their lab results, what's wrong with them, in the periphery of his vision. It lets him be a better doctor. These are important things. And again, some of these use cases are what will really transcend, and we'll see them hit consumers eventually. Google Glass is not dead. A lot of pundits in the press have been saying, it's dead, it's dead. They just stopped selling the first prototype. They're working on a new version. The Italian company Luxottica is helping them to design something that'll be a little less freaky looking. And I think it's important to understand that no one ever thought that Google Glass was going to be the iPhone of heads-up display. It was the first, the most interesting, it was very well publicized. It was, I think, the Apple Newton of heads-up display. The Apple Newton, which was 20 years before the first iPhone in 2007. The Apple Newton, which showed that you could actually compute in the palm of your hand. People were thrilled with it. There are people who still miss it to this day. So again, 20 years it took from the Newton to the iPhone. We've just started with Google Glass and related things. By the way, it's far from only Google Glass that is doing this. This is the iAir Touch out of Taiwan, which is kind of a combination of AR and VR. This is the Scully motorcycle helmet, which is fantastic, right? Because it's hard enough to drive a motorcycle, but now you can have navigational information, other things that you need to know, how fast you're going, all displayed in a translucent layer of information between you and the street. And then, of course, we have Microsoft's HoloLens, which is a way for people to play with holograms. They don't like talking about augmented reality, although I think that's really what it is. This is a rare exception, is that you don't need a phone to use this, although it does need to be in a Wi-Fi environment. And this is a three-dimensional version of Minecraft. And Microsoft bought Minecraft, I think, largely because they thought it was the perfect gaming environment for the HoloLens. And what you're seeing here is manipulable information. If Google Glass gives you a layer of information and allows you to take some pictures and trade some things, but you don't touch it and play with it, that's the difference between Google Glass and the HoloLens. It creates a tactile environment where you have virtual gloves and the ability to move things. So if you take all of the tactility, all of the touchiness of the tablet, and you move it into 3 dimensions, that's when you get the HoloLens. Now we talk about virtual reality, which is much more of a media environment. It's about entertainment and games. I think most popular example is Oculus Rift. Everyone who wears Oculus Rift, they look like Stevie Wonder or Ray Charles. They're going like this. But it's absolutely remarkable. If you've seen anyone wear these things, I saw someone, a woman who was ordinarily very calm, on a virtual roller coaster wearing Oculus Rift, screaming her head off in a room full of 500 people because she was so convinced that she was there. This just hit the New York Times last night, which is that Oculus will actually be shipping in early 2016. They said it was 2015. They've pushed it back. And Oculus is very immersive. This is the low-end Samsung Gear VR, which you can get for $200. It looks 96 degrees of viewing. It's extraordinarily immersive. It makes IMAX look like a 13-inch black and white television. This is the media consumption environment of your future. And it's not just Oculus. Arcos can actually take your existing cell phone and plug it into a slot, and you can wear it on your face, which means that you don't have to buy another device. Sony's Project Morpheus is really for use with PlayStation. It's a gaming environment. We also have Valve, which are the people who make the Steam engines, and HTC. Yeah, doesn't that look comfortable? Isn't that great? Glasses designed by the Marquis de Sade, near as I can tell. And my question is, what happens when everybody's wearing these things all the time? Right, this is a picture of a family. They're all wearing sunglasses. But if every one of those pairs of sunglasses was an Oculus Rift device, suddenly people are not in the same world at all anymore. And that, again, is a very interesting thing from any perspective as citizens of the world, but also as media people. Will virtual reality devices accelerate what we see happening already in this picture, where Bud's on the tablet, Mom's on the laptop, Dad, poor dinosaur that he is watching the big screen, and only the little girl is actually doing something that does not involve electronics? How quickly are we going to accelerate into a place where we're just not in the same world anymore? This is a really interesting company. They raised over $500 million of venture capital. It's called Magic Leap, and it's a blend of virtual reality and augmented reality. You can see these holograms dancing on your hand. But they also, and this is taken from their patent application, they also imagined that mom and daughter would both be in the supermarket together. Mom is going to be looking at, recipes and ingredients and consulting with a virtual cook who's going to be her guide. Meanwhile, the daughter's playing a game called Find Gerald, where the entire supermarket has turned into a game space. And this is really interesting, right? On the one hand, it sounds like a lot more fun for the kid, but it also, suddenly mom and kid are not having that shared experience anymore. And you know, I've taken my kids to the grocery store millions of times. Those are some of the best conversations we have, but we have them because we're kind of forced to be together. And if you're no longer forced to be together, then when are you going to talk? From a media perspective, this is also from their patent application. This is what Netflix looks like with Magic Leap. There's the big screen and the glasses. The entire living room has turned into a way of analyzing, choosing media, making choices about different trailers. Imagine very quickly they'll also have, okay, there's the show, here's the peripheral information, who made the show, who's in it, what else have they been in. Oh, I like that sweater, right? The fantasy of e-commerce and plugged into media, I think, will become very quickly possible with technologies like Magic Leap. So I'm coming to the end, but I want to kind of drill down and talk about some of the media implications that we have here. I've talked about them a little bit already. Things like better advertising, targeting, you know, questions about how do you scale your programming if it's going on someone's wrist? How do you target an ad if you're targeting someone's elbow as opposed to targeting someone's whole person? All of these things are true, but there are other questions I think that are important. So we have obstacles, and we also have opportunities. So with obstacles, which is one of my favorite Far Sides, by the way, we already have extraordinary fragmentation. Fragmentation in media, fragmentation of our attention, fragmentation of our relationships, fragmentation of our attention across different devices. I don't hear about this much anymore because I think people have just given up, but Don Schultz of Northwestern University was the first person to tell me about simultaneous media consumption, where back in the desktop and laptop days, you were watching a television show with your laptop in your lap. And if media people are selling advertising on the basis of 100% attention being paid to an ad on the big screen, but someone's looking at the laptop in their lap, then they're getting overcharged. And if you then add a tablet and a phone and a HoloLens into that particular mix, then suddenly what we're buying and selling when it comes to attention, because that's what media is selling, becomes very problematic. So fragmentation is increasing. And also where the revenue comes from is getting more hard to figure out. So back in the analog days, you would make money from the people who really loved you. You would also make money from the people who really liked you. And you would even make money from the people who were indifferent to you, because there just wasn't that much on. What we saw is that the people who were indifferent, and even some of the people who liked you, they were a largely passive audience. But the passive audience started to erode as far back as the 1950s, when the remote control first came on. When suddenly with the remote control that you no longer had to deal with being too darn lazy to get up off the couch and change the channel. Right? That was no longer a challenge. You could change the channel just by pressing a button and still not move. Then we had cable TV, which really started to grow in the 1970s. Suddenly there was a lot more to watch. Then the internet exploded in the 1990s. I don't even have video games there as an increased source of fragmentation. And then with mobile and social in the 2000s, we've seen increasing fragmentation across devices and platforms. And now with wearables, we're going to accelerate that even more. So now digital audience profit today would say you're still going to make the same amount of money, probably even more from the people who love you. You're going to make a lot less money from the people who merely like you. How much money do you think you're going to make from the people who are indifferent to you? I don't even have a money bag there. It's that little. These are the micro behaviors that I talked about before. With the same thing that happened with music, with going from the album to the song, I think a lot of times we're now going from the show to the clip. This is a completely fascinating program in the United States on Spike TV called Lip Sync Battle, where celebrities lip sync and challenge each other. And I've never seen it on television. I've only seen it on YouTube and on Spike TV's website. And it circulates madly online through social media. And it's a big deal, but it's not a big deal on the big screen. So the opportunities, let's talk about those. The audience is standing up, and wanting to be a part of the experience that you are creating for them. Don't get me wrong, we love television. We've loved television, I think, now more than we've ever loved it. Without television, what would people be writing about on social media? Social media is just broadcast word of mouth. But word of mouth, people need things to talk about, and you can only talk about tragedy and the new refrigerator that you need so much. And so the great water cooler of the electronic age and the digital age is still television. It's just that television is changing. That's what this whole festival is about. And the audiences, and that's my particular source of fascination, audiences are moving from passive to active. There's still a lot of passive, but the stuff that happens when people really love you, that's when you have to love them back even harder. That's the opportunity in front of you, and that, I think, is what wearables can do. So this is a remarkable Norwegian story, which is slow TV. And this was the second burst of slow TV on NRK, when people watched this boat go on a cruise for 135 hours, which you all are nodding like, yes, of course we would do that. But I'm from America. I don't want to do anything for 135 hours. And it's completely shocking that this would happen. But what's more shocking, and what's about the participation that I think is so important, is that what you see in this picture is that people were coming out as the boat was coming to their little town. The entire town would come out to celebrate and wave and say, hi, we're here. And then it gets really weird, because people on the boat who are on the trip for 134 hours, where this is happening, and they're inside the boat watching the television show. So they're watching the television show of the boat ride that they're on, which is weird. But again, it's that participation that I think is so important. People love this so much that they want to be a part of it. And it's not just Norway, but again, we're shortening the distance, to go back to Larry Page, shortening the distance between intent and action, making it easier for us. Wearables are the ultimate impulse device. Apple has built Apple Pay into the Apple Watch, so all you have to do is you pay. You don't even have to fish around for your phone or whip out your ATM card. You just touch your wrist, and you've paid for your groceries at many. I mean, that's much simpler. The people I know who have Pebble watches say that it's transformative because they don't have to grab for their phone, even though it only takes a couple seconds. But you can just look and see, is this something that I need? Glanceability very quickly becomes very important. So it's not just here with slow TV. We also have what happened with American Idol in the United States with texting. American Idol largely introduced texting to the United States. In 2003, there were 7.5 million text votes. And there's Pop Idol in the UK, all the idols everywhere. 41.5 million in 2005, 120 million in 2006. Last number I have, 178 million votes in 2009. Ultimately, they gave up on texting because people wanted to vote via Facebook, but it was this remarkable thing where a technology was largely driven by media, and vice versa. This is a Fast Company article which said in 2003, AT&T had helped American Idol set up a voting system that relied on text messages rather than voice calls. This was a big deal. At the time, text messaging was still new in the US. Some 22% of respondents to a 2008 informal poll on AT&T's website said they learned to text in order to vote on the show. This is important. This is telling you how badly your audiences want to do things with you. And it doesn't matter where the device is, if it's on the head, if it's on the pocket, if it's on the wrist, if it's on the other wrist. What matters is that you're giving people an opportunity to play with the things that you create. And I want to, as I'm winding up, I want to make a really important distinction. And it's a distinction between play and games. I love video games, and I love all sorts of games, but I've become very impatient with all of this talk about gamification. Gamification of this, gamification of that. Gamification is going to change everything. And the reason that I'm impatient with it is that it plays to the prejudices and insecurities of corporations and media companies. Because when you're creating a game and asking someone else to play your game, you are making all the rules. And that is not listening to your audience the way Facebook did, as I said earlier, with the photographs. Facebook paid attention to the fact that people were changing their photographs multiple times a week, sometimes multiple times a day. That was play. There are no rules with play, or if there are rules, they're rules that are negotiated in collaboration among different people. This dog is playing, and very cute. But games are different. So don't be afraid of allowing your products to be open, allowing people to play with your products, because that's where you're going to learn the most, by watching what people do with your media when you're not looking. This is from VE Day, and the point of showing it here is that ultimately people want to do things with each other, not just with media. People want that contact, and the reason the water cooler is exciting is because it gives us an opportunity to connect with each other in a way that we wouldn't if we didn't have anything to talk about. If your products can create opportunities for people to make contact with each other, not just with the media, then you're giving your people, the people who are consuming your product, an opportunity to stop being just a collection of individuals and to start being an audience. And that is the most exciting possibility that I think we have. We are living in the most transformative time in our species. Digital transformation is as big as the discovery of fire, as the invention of the wheel, as the creation of the Gutenberg press. I think it's bigger than television. I think it's as important as the telephone. And I think that the exciting but very scary future that you have in front of you is to figure out what to do now that the audience has risen. And I think that the reason that I'm ending with this is that as wearables finish that incredible journey where we have digital coming from the back room into the living room, out to the world, and then finally pouring over our bodies, that we are living in a completely digital environment now. And you have so many opportunities to interact with people in such a positive, constructive way. And that is the vision of the future. So I want to end by suggesting it's time to throw some sheep. Right? Figure out what people can do with this and how wearables can help you connect your audiences to your product, but also to each other. And I think you're going to be looking at a very big win. Thank you very much. I think we have some time for questions.
So please raise your hands for questions to Brad. Anyone? If not, I'm going to start with the first one, okay?
Okay.
Okay. 10 years ago, no one knew what an iPhone was.
Right.
And today, everyone owns one, practically,
Yeah.
or a similar kind.
Yes.
How much time in the future will it take until everyone owns an iWatch or Google Glasses?
Well, okay. I think if the question is how long until somebody owns some wearable device, I think it's going to actually be a while. I think that if you're looking at the iPhone audience, which tends to be wealthier and more educated, I think we'll start to see that relatively quickly. I think that it won't be the same penetration as the iPhone. It might be up there with the tablet. When it comes to any wearable device, I think that increasingly what will happen is as wearable devices make things easier for people, then people will start to adopt them. That's the big deal. When the reason we all got computers in the first place was because it was easier to type on a computer where you could edit than it was to type on a typewriter. With the iPhone, suddenly texting became possible because instead of having to hit a key 3 times to get to the letter C, you could just get to the letter C. So as the use cases happen where suddenly you have a fitness goal and the fitness goal is made easier by one of these devices, which, by the way, it is. Anyone who's trying to achieve some fitness goal and who wears one of these things, they find it a remarkably freeing and helpful experience. So. Surely there's one question. I know I gave you a lot of information.
So many people, so few questions. Anyone?
Back there.
There's one.
Oh, hello. Yes, I loved your talk earlier.
You talked before about how you're expecting eventually people to be watching content on the watches. What sort of research has there been in terms of, you know, going from the big screen to the laptop screen to the tablet screen to the phone screen? Like, is there a size at which people are just simply not going to want to consume media, or does the convenience outweigh the fidelity?
I saw a bunch of research from Yumi a while back. Certainly the media companies in the US are very interested in this. It's a generational thing more than it is a technology thing. And so if you're slicing and dicing this across, you know, millennials and younger, then there's more appetite for consuming things whenever, wherever. And again, it's not even necessarily the size of the screen, it's that you have a screen. And so as televisions became cheaper, and suddenly when you bought a new TV, you moved the old TV up into the kids' room, right? That's what started a lot of the fragmentation, was the erosion in price of a television. Similarly, it's just the accessibility, that if you've got a laptop and 3 tablets and a phone and everybody wants to watch something different, there's nothing inhibiting that anymore. So, you know, my sense from what I have read and what I've seen is that youngsters are the ones who are most likely to watch a movie on a tiny, tiny screen. Not only because, you know, that way they get away from mom and dad, but also because they can do it in bed, under the covers, you know, nesting. So, you know, the Apple Watch and the various Samsung watches and other smartwatches, we just haven't been around long enough for us to have any kind of a baseline. Please.
I just wonder, how do you think the relationship will be between people in the future if we are going to communicate like that family, that they have their own devices? How do you think we will have our free time?
I think relationships are always really hard. Any kind of relationship is hard. And I think that when you have a new challenge from a new technology, it means you have to do a new kind of work. You know, I'm an old internet guy. I've been doing this for a while. And I remember back in the day I used to work at Earthlink, which was an internet service provider, and we had this service called parental controls. And parental controls were a way you could lock down different websites and different things from your kids so they couldn't go on places online. And this is getting into an arms race with your children. And because they're younger and have more time and energy, they will always win in the arms race. And it's the work you need to do at that point, the new work you need to do because of new challenges, to actually talk with your kids. My kids and I talk about media all the time. I don't, you know, they have lots of restrictions about how much time, but what's more important to me is that they ask me about, can I download this app, Dad? I'm on this website, is that okay, Dad? They know that I care, and they know that I have more experience. So it means that you have to do more work. There's a remarkable book by Daniel J. Levitin called The Organized Mind, which I recommend heartily. And what Dan talks about is shadow work. That it used to be when we made travel arrangements, we would have a travel agent that we would call, and the travel agent's job was to make all of those arrangements. Well, then that went away, and now we have to do all of that work ourselves. Now we have to go to the airline, we have to rent the car, we have to do everything ourselves. It's shadow work. As business people, we're not compensated for this shadow work. It comes out of our time, either time we should be doing for other things or our personal time. But shadow work is not just about corporations. Shadow work is about all of the new ways that these time-saving technologies are draining our time away. And so when it comes to relationships, it means you have to work harder. And you have to say things like, hi, I'd like to spend time with you, or take the glasses off and look at the real world for a change. Those things are hard to do. But you know, our parents had different challenges. You know, their challenges were turn off the television, but they at least knew what we were looking at. But also our parents had other challenges, like when we were gone, they had no way of knowing where we were. Right? We would be gone all day. They couldn't reach us. They got used to the idea that, okay, maybe we're with, you know, our best friend down the street. Maybe we're dead in a ditch. But there were no cell phones. So now, I mean, basically, I've got my kids low-jacked, right? Because, you know, I can reach them with the touch of a button. There's a dark side to that also. Right? So it's a bad answer to your question. It's the best I got. So there's a question back there?
Yeah, you raised the question of what does this mean for me pushing for the media content that's
I can hear you, but that thing doesn't like you.
I was saying that when you ask for what does this mean for media, isn't that really a question of finding some media content that's important enough to always have to be on the innovation edges? So you need to have some kind of media content that's important enough. Let's say if you're a sports idiot, wouldn't you want to follow the results on the Apple Watch or some wearable?
Yeah, I think that, but I think I would only like to put a little bit of pressure on the word important, because the media itself does not necessarily have to be important for the story it tells. I think what I'm trying to convey is that the media is going to be important to the extent that it's shareable, and that it is a conduit for a connection between two people. And that, yes, if you support the team, you want to know the results of the team, you want to know as quickly as possible, but generally that's in the service of a conversation you're going to have later on, an email you're going to have later on. So important is it's a term that there's no metric for, right? There's no like scale of importance. But shareability, that's something that you can start thinking about. Portability, transmissibility, that I think is where these things are. And also the other thing about important is that it gets us into a dreary conversation about news and economics and statistics. And you know, if you look at like that slide of Anna Kendrick from Celebrity Lip Sync Battle, that's not important, but wow, people are sharing it a lot. And the reason they're sharing it a lot is because it allows them to touch each other via media. So that's the build I would make is on that word important, which may mean something entirely different in Norwegian. So we're dealing with a big challenge here. I've got just another couple seconds. Way in back? I'm so glad you're asking questions. Thank you. Thank you. I was worried that I just terrified you all into silence. No, back there. Stand up, stand up. She can't see you. Yes, sir.
You're talking about Apple Watch and Google Glasses are the trending now. Are you saying what will be the next step after the watch?
The next step after the watch. Oh, that's exciting. I think the contact lenses are a big deal. Eventually, and I think that they're a big deal for two reasons. First of all, and they already have prototypes of them. There is this company in Bruges that has like the Terminator ones, so they're all red and they look creepy. The reason that those are exciting is because they're inobtrusive. One of the problems with these wearing heads-up display is that people think, are you looking at me or are you looking at Facebook, right? There's this distance that people have between you, and they become suspicious of the technology. As the technology becomes more and more portable and small, it becomes more and more powerful. It's not necessarily that I know what the form factor of the future is, but if you look at wearability as a phenomenon, then you start to get very concerned with the continued life of things like the tablet. I think of the tablet as a very temporary form of technology because it's bulky and you carry it around, and if you can have things just on your face and you have maybe like a little glove that you wear or you have little things inserted in your fingers and you can do all of that, then why do you need a tablet? And that's a problem for, say, magazine publishers who've just spent billions of dollars over the last few years optimizing all of their stuff for tablets. So it's not that the form factor of the future is something I know. I wish I did because I'd be making a gazillion dollars. But what's more important is not to get too attached to any particular form factor, because I can envision a day in the very near future where we don't have phones, we don't have tablets, we don't have laptops, we don't have desktops, where we just have a device that's linking us to the internet. We have screens. Screens are everywhere, and we live in a highly digital universe, but where devices are not our anchors to the universe in the way that they are now. And that, I think, is a future that we, as media people, should be paying very close attention to, because if we don't have the same screens, we probably don't have the same product. And if we don't have the same product, we probably don't have the same audiences, which means we probably should be thinking really hard. So, thank you so very much.